In 2003, George Lucas filmed a scene that would never appear in his film. Natalie Portman was there. Jimmy Smits was there. A then largely unknown actress named Genevieve O'Reilly was also there, playing a character called Mon Mothma for the first time, delivering dialogue that established the political foundation of the Rebel Alliance. 3 scenes were shot during principal photography for Star Wars Episode III, Revenge of the Sith. All 3 were cut during the 2004 to 2005 editing process. All 3 are watchable right now in the extras section on Disney+. One deleted scene, if they had kept it in, the whole prequel trilogy feels different. The theatrical release of Revenge of the Sith on May 19, 2005, contained none of it. What it contained instead was a version of Padmé Amidala who watched history happen from a window, who traveled to Mustafar with love rather than strategy, and who was diagnosed by a GH7 medical droid as having lost the will to live. The version of Padme who was filmed, who organized the political resistance to Chancellor Palpatine, who co-authored the petition of the delegation of 2000, who confronted the Chancellor directly, was gone by the time the film reached theaters. George Lucas said as much on the home media release. In a bonus featurette included with the November 2005 DVD, he gave his reasoning directly. The subplot's deletion was the result of a decision to focus the film more on Anakin and his fall from grace. The word preceding that explanation was unfortunately. This isn't an editor defending an obvious trim. It's a director acknowledging a loss. To understand what that loss actually costs, you have to see what was filmed. The scenes have titles. A Stirring in the Senate takes place in Bail Organa's office. Seeds of Rebellion takes place in Padme's Coruscant apartment. Confronting the Chancellor takes place in Palpatine's office. 3 discrete scenes, filmed as a sequential political subplot, released on the DVD under the menu title Seeds of Rebellion, and later acknowledged by Lucasfilm's own Dawn of Rebellion reference guide as the founding narrative of the Rebel Alliance. What Pablo Hidalgo's book frames as the birth of the rebellion itself. The core of the subplot unfolds in Padme's apartment, not a Senate chamber, not a formal political venue, an apartment. Because what's happening there isn't official Senate business. It's the beginning of something that isn't yet legal, isn't yet named, and isn't yet armed. A group of senators gather in secret. Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, Padme, others. A living room on Coruscant, talking quietly about the end of a democracy they've watched erode in real time. Mon Mothma is the one who articulates what they're asking for. Her demands are specific enough to be worth quoting exactly. In broad strokes, our demands are that Chancellor Palpatine relinquish the emergency war powers granted to him, abolish the sector governance decree, and begin ceasefire talks with Count Dooku's separatists. She doesn't frame this as rebellion. She frames it as a constitutional remedy. The petition isn't a declaration of war. It's a formal request for Palpatine to comply with the legal framework he claims to uphold. This matters enormously for understanding the scene's political register. What's happening in Padme's apartment is technically within the law. It's the last peaceful act available to people who've watched legal structures fail. Padme's role in the scene is described in production notes as initially cautious. She wants to bring a trusted Jedi into the loop, specifically Anakin, but the other senators convince her to let the Senate mechanism work first. This isn't passivity. It's the instinct of a politician with more than a decade of institutional experience. She knows that involving a Jedi complicates the political calculus, signals the wrong kind of confrontation before the petition has been formally presented, and risks the coalition before it's ready. She agrees to hold off. She proceeds without him. That's an active political decision with a specific unintended consequence. The resistance she helps build remains independent of the Jedi Order, which means it survives Order 66 when the Order doesn't. From Seeds of Rebellion, the subplot moves to A Stirring in the Senate, Bail Organa's office, where the mechanics of coalition building happen. Who has committed to signing? What the petition's specific language will be? How to time the presentation? Then, confronting the Chancellor completes the sequence. The senators present their demands to Palpatine directly. Padme is listed in the delegation's leadership group. She is co-presenting the document to the man she knows is engineering the collapse of the Republic she spent her life serving. A Yahoo Entertainment breakdown of the scenes, published in 2025, put the significance plainly. Padme was already the mother of the rebellion, in the figurative sense, as the mother of Luke and Leia. But this makes her a literal mother of the rebellion, as a founding member before her tragic death. A literal founding member. Filmed during principal photography. Completed to sufficient visual quality to appear on the November 2005 DVD and on Disney+, where fan editors have since built 4K upscaled reconstructions. The decision to cut these scenes wasn't technical. Lucas said clearly what it was. He chose Anakin's story. That choice was internally coherent. Revenge of the Sith is Anakin Skywalker's tragedy. His fall to the dark side is the emotional payload the entire prequel trilogy was built toward. Adding a substantial parallel subplot, one that follows a different protagonist through a different emotional arc, genuinely risks splitting the audience's attention during the saga's most critical narrative sequence. A film that tries to give equal weight to Anakin's collapse and Padme's political founding is harder to sustain tonally. The theatrical cut is focused and, within its focus, genuinely devastating. The problem is that removing Padme's political arc didn't just shorten the film. It removed the contextual infrastructure that makes the rest of her scenes function. In The Phantom Menace, Padmé Amidala is 14 years old when she liberates Naboo from Trade Federation occupation. She doesn't wait for Senate authorization. She forms an alliance with the Gungans, designs a tactical strategy, and recaptures her planet. In Attack of the Clones, she challenges emergency war powers on the Senate floor, survives an assassination attempt in her apartment, fights in the Geonosis arena, and commands a tactical retreat under fire. 2 films establish her as one of the most politically and physically active characters in the saga. She acts, she leads, her decisions have consequences. The theatrical cut of Episode 3 gives her these scenes. She tells Anakin she's pregnant on the balcony. She watches the Jedi Temple burn from a window. She asks Obi-Wan whether Anakin is all right after the opening battle. She goes to Mustafar alone to find Anakin. Anakin force chokes her unconscious when he sees Obi-Wan step off her ship. She gives birth to twins on Polis Massa. She tells Obi-Wan there's still good in Anakin. She dies. Multiple academic analyses, published in peer-reviewed journals of film studies, feminist media criticism, and political science, reach the same structural conclusion using different terminology. Throughout Episode 3, Padme rarely speaks about anything other than her husband, a passive role as an ineffectual figurehead. In Episode 3, Padme hasn't much of a function which can affect the plot. A 2012 review in the Forever Cinematic Archive, written by a critic who otherwise defends the theatrical cut, made the practical observation directly. In the film as it is, she essentially sits around her apartment waiting for people to inform her of the latest plot developments and get emotional over them. Every scene she has in the theatrical cut is reactive. She responds to information delivered by other characters. The one moment where she takes initiative, traveling to Mustafar, ends with her rendered unconscious by the man she went to confront. In narrative terms, she initiates and the scene immediately overrules her. She never has a moment in the theatrical cut where a decision she makes changes the course of events. Natalie Portman has described the prequel backlash as a bummer, acknowledging that when something has that much anticipation, it can almost only disappoint. Outside of these films, Portman is one of the most technically capable and emotionally precise dramatic actresses working in Hollywood. The performance problem isn't hers. The structure left her without scenes that accumulate to anything. A character defined across episodes 1 and 2 by active political courage is placed, in episode 3, inside a series of domestic and reactive settings, with the political scenes that would have connected those settings to her eventual death sitting on a server in the Disney Plus Extras folder. Then the GH7 medical droid delivers its verdict. For reasons we can't explain, we are losing her. Obi-Wan asks if she's dying. The droid: we don't know why. She has lost the will to live. We need to operate quickly if we are to save the babies. This line has generated ongoing critical debate since the film's release. There is a version of this moment that is genuinely tragic and thematically coherent. If you've seen Padme spend Episode 3 fighting for the Republic from inside a failing Senate, building a coalition, drafting a petition, confronting the Chancellor who is dismantling the democratic framework she's given her political life to, then the collapse of her will makes sense at a level no medical instrument can measure. She has lost everything simultaneously. The Republic she spent years serving, the husband she loved, and the ideological framework that organized her entire existence. The GH7's clinical bafflement, for reasons we can't explain, we don't know why, reads as the machine's honest inability to quantify political grief. You can't scan for it. You can only report that someone is dying without a measurable physical cause. That reading is genuinely interesting. It also depends entirely on the deleted scenes existing. Without the political subplot, the theatrical Padme has lost one specific thing: Anakin. Her death reads as a death from romantic heartbreak. A woman who loved a man, watched him choose darkness, and couldn't survive it. That's not nothing. But it's also not the character who stood in the Senate and told Palpatine he was wrong. The loses the will to live diagnosis, with the deleted scenes included, is the clinical endpoint of a complete arc. A woman who fought for democratic institutions until they were gone, who lost her republic and her husband in the same week, who ran out of reasons. Without the deleted scenes, the diagnosis fits a smaller, quieter version of the character, and the gap between who Padme was across episodes 1 and 2 and what the theatrical cut leaves her doing in episode 3 is the source of 20 years of critical frustration that has never fully resolved, because the film never gave the audience the scenes that would have resolved it. Matthew Stover's official novelization of Revenge of the Sith, published in April 2005 before the theatrical release, preserves what the film cut. Stover wrote with access to Lucas's full intended story structure, including the delegation of 2000 material. Wikipedia confirms this formally. These scenes were also featured in the film's novelization. The book was described as one that crackles with action and captures the iconic characters in all their complexity. Language that reflects what the book actually delivers, because Stover was working from a version of the story where Padme's political identity was still intact. The novelization's Padme carries the political subplot through her interiority, even when the scenes themselves don't appear as dramatized sequences. Her grief at Mustafar is grounded in what she's been fighting for, not just in who she married. The Mustafar confrontation contains dialogue and internal perspective not present in the theatrical cut, reflecting the fuller emotional and moral landscape of Lucas's original structure. The novelization's handling of Obi-Wan and Anakin's dynamic also goes deeper. Stover's access to the fuller story gave him the architecture to write what the theatrical cut had already decided to simplify. The fan and critical consensus that the Stover novelization is superior to the theatrical film in its handling of character has held across 2 decades. It isn't a fluke. It reflects the fact that Stover was working from a story where the characters had fuller, more coherent arcs, and Padme in particular had not yet been separated from the political purpose that made her death legible. The concept art requires its own category, because the distinction between filmed deleted scenes and pre-production drawings is real and matters for precision. Ian McCaig designed Padmé Amidala from the prequel trilogy's initial concept development. His contributions shaped how the character looked and moved across all 3 films. On StarWars.com, he described her as the force of the film. His function during pre-production was to imagine possibilities that hadn't yet become formal script pages, to draw the story into visual existence so that Lucas and the production team could respond to it. Before principal photography began on Revenge of the Sith, McKeag was exploring the Mustafar confrontation in pencil and concept drawings. What he conceived never became a shooting script. No footage of it exists. It lived only at the pre-production conceptual stage, which is critical to state clearly, because what he imagined is extraordinary enough that the gap between concept art and deleted scene needs to be understood before the concept can be evaluated accurately. In 2016, McKeag described the concept at the Academy of Art University. Padme can see that he is becoming a monster. At the end, on Mustafar, when she goes to see him, she has a knife in her hands. She gets off the ship with the knife. She runs up and throws her arms around him, and he lets her. She's got the knife to the back of his neck, and she's going to kill him. Again, he lets her. But she can't do it. She loves him too much to stop him, even when he becomes the monster. The concept art, published in The Art of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, shows her in a dark red cloak, a sharp dagger in her left hand. Lucasfilm archivist Phil Shostak later noted on social media that he had been brainstorming with McKeag when McKeag proposed the knife, and that George Lucas responded favorably, though the full text of Lucas's response isn't available in documented sources. What that response extended to, whether it influenced any screenplay drafts or stopped at the concept stage, isn't confirmed by available primary sources. What is confirmed, this was a serious enough creative conversation about Padme's character that McKeag drew it, Shostak was present, and Lucas engaged with it before the production moved on. McKeag also described the design philosophy behind this version of Padme. She's in love with a monster, so I wanted to make her courageous and strong, like a lioness. He stated explicitly that in this conception she would have been the one who started the rebellion. The knife on Mustafar isn't a gesture of passion. It's a political act performed by a woman who knows exactly what Anakin Skywalker has become, who understands that the Republic can't survive him, and who has arrived prepared to do what the story requires of a hero. She has the knife at his neck. He knows, and he lets her. She fails, because she is human and she loves him. And that failure is the specific human moment that makes everything after it legible. She tried the final, irreversible act and couldn't do it. That failure doesn't end her story. In the McKeag conception, it redirects it. She goes back and builds the political resistance that will outlast her. The delegation of 2000, the petition, the senators meeting in her apartment. The assassination she couldn't perform becomes the founding she does instead. In the theatrical cut, Anakin attacks Padme from jealous paranoia. He sees Obi-Wan step off her ship and assumes betrayal. She's a victim of his fracturing mind, arriving in love, harmed by rage, rendered unconscious, and taken to die on Polis Massa without ever having made a choice that mattered to the plot. In the McKeag concept, she arrives as an actor. She holds the knife. She chooses the wrong thing, the human thing. Her death becomes the consequence of a specific moral failure in a specific impossible moment, rather than the collateral damage of someone else's breakdown. Those are fundamentally different deaths, and one of them is a tragedy of history, while the other is a tragedy of being in the wrong place. There is one additional Mustafar claim that belongs in this account, handled with a single hedge. Reportedly, according to J.W. Rinsler's making-of book, the duel's original scripted exchange began with a burning Anakin saying, "Help me, Master," a line Obi-Wan refused before the theatrical cut exchange of, "I hate you," and "You are my brother, Anakin. I loved you," concluded the scene. The theatrical exchange, as it stands, is devastating. Anakin burning, "I hate you." Obi-Wan walking away. "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." If the "help me" preceded it, if Obi-Wan's declaration of love came after a refusal to assist a man who asked for help while his body was burning, the scene becomes something categorically different. A farewell between broken brothers is one thing. A man leaving another man to die, marking the act with a statement of love he had already nullified, is another. Obi-Wan Kenobi, in Return of the Jedi, speaks from beyond death as a moral authority, a calm guide whose certainty about the Force never wavers. Every scene where he functions in that capacity carries a different resonance against the image of him standing on a lava bank, refusing a burning man's plea. The reported exchange fits the larger pattern of the material, a version of Revenge of the Sith with darker, more morally complex choices built into every major character at the climax, and a series of editorial decisions that progressively simplified them. Every one of those decisions connects to the same consequence: the severing of the narrative bridge between the prequel era and the original trilogy. In Return of the Jedi, released in 1983 and set approximately 23 years after Revenge of the Sith, Mon Mothma stands before the assembled Rebel Alliance and briefs them on the attack against the second Death Star. StarWars.com's official character profile describes her as calm and authoritative, the unambiguous leader of a galaxy-wide military resistance. Wikipedia's account of her arc states that, after years of leading a double life, Mothma became the impetus for the official establishment of the Rebel Alliance by resigning from the Senate. The theatrical cut of Revenge of the Sith, set in 19 BBY, contains exactly 0 scenes with her. The woman who appears in Return of the Jedi as the long-serving head of a galaxy-wide resistance materializes from off-screen, without a prequel-era origin scene in any theatrical release. With the deleted scenes, the origin is right there. Mon Mothma in Padme's apartment on Coruscant, making specific constitutional demands to a group of senators in a private meeting. Mon Mothma in Palpatine's office, co-presenting the petition. 23 years later, she's in a military command center organizing the assault on the Death Star. The theatrical cut breaks the line between those two moments. The rebellion appears fully formed in Episode 4, without the prequel trilogy ever showing you the meeting where it began. Genevieve O'Reilly's career trajectory is the documentary record of this severed bridge. She filmed her scenes as Mon Mothma during the 2003 principal photography of Revenge of the Sith. The scenes were cut. She didn't appear in the May 2005 theatrical release. 13 years later, Lucasfilm cast her again for Rogue One, a Star Wars story, a film that exists partly because Episode 3 never established where the rebellion came from. She returned again in Andor, premiering in 2022, which follows Mon Mothma's arc as a senator secretly financing resistance from inside an authoritarian Senate. The arc that was supposed to be in Episode 3, a politician using institutional position as cover for covert opposition to an emerging autocracy, became the subject of 2 streaming productions made decades later. O'Reilly built an entire character legacy out of footage that was cut. The role she first played in 2003 didn't reach audiences until 2016. Pablo Hidalgo's Star Wars Dawn of Rebellion reference guide formally acknowledged the Delegation of 2000's place in the Rebel Alliance's founding narrative. The delegation appears in official Lucasfilm databanks. The formal canon status of deleted scenes under the 2014 continuity reset is contested. Wikipedia's own talk pages contain active arguments on both sides, but the operational fact is this: Rogue One, Andor, and Star Wars Rebels are collectively a decade-long attempt to tell the story those 3 deleted scenes told first in 2003. The productions that now constitute the canonical origin of the Rebel Alliance were made specifically to fill the gap the editorial decision created. Padme appears in none of them. She died in Episode 3. Her role as a founding figure, the woman who convened the first meetings, organized the petition, confronted the Chancellor, and in McKaig's conception, arrived on Mustafar prepared to kill the man she loved for the sake of the Republic, is absent from every Lucasfilm production made after 2005. Mon Mothma in Andor is a rich, extraordinary portrayal, but it replaces rather than restores Padme's narrative function. Padme is missing from her own founding act in the canonical record that exists. Multiple academic analyses of the saga describe Princess Leia as the fulfillment of Padmé Amidala. The parallel is structural. A senator who uses diplomatic immunity and parliamentary position as cover for running a secret armed resistance, who combines legislative procedure with covert military command, who understands that failing institutions require a harder response than continued engagement. Leia's identity as both senator and rebel leader is exactly what the deleted scenes established for Padme 3 films earlier. The thematic connection survives the cuts. The theatrical saga gestures at the inheritance. But the narrative connection, Padme literally founding the organization Leia will eventually command, is absent. The audience is asked to feel the inheritance without being shown the transfer. The deleted scenes are the document that should have completed that transaction. Bail Organa's theatrical Episode 3 arc ends with him taking baby Leia to Alderaan, which is moving on its own terms. Rogue One confirms him as a key rebel founder, and that revelation lands differently when his founding activity was demonstrated in Episode 3, rather than retroactively implied. The scenes in Padme's apartment and Palpatine's office establish the same Bail Organa who, 18 years later, quietly backs a secret mission to steal the Death Star plans. The theatrical cut gives you the loving, adoptive father. The deleted scenes give you the political organizer in the moment of founding. The 3 delegation scenes were among the footage Lucas cut from the final film. The footage was completed to sufficient technical quality for Lucas to approve it for DVD release in November 2005. Fan editors have since assembled 4K upscaled reconstructions of an extended cut that includes them, because the gap they fill is legible once you know the scenes exist. The film with the deleted footage moves differently. Padme's trajectory makes sense. The GH7 medical droid's clinical bafflement at her dying carries the weight it was designed to carry. Mon Mothma's appearance in Return of the Jedi has a prequel-era visual origin. Leia's identity as her mother's political heir is demonstrated rather than implied. The version of Revenge of the Sith we have is the only one that will receive an official theatrical release. Lucas stated that his theatrical cuts are the definitive versions, and the Disney-era Lucasfilm hasn't revisited Episode 3's editorial structure, despite extensively expanding the era through other productions. The deleted scenes remain in the extras folder. But knowing what was filmed changes how you watch what survived. The GH7 droids loses the will to live reads differently when you know that the woman dying on that table spent the film trying to save the Republic through organized political action, and the film chose not to show you that. Mon Mothma's calm authority in Return of the Jedi reads differently when you know she had an origin scene in 2003 that was left in an editing bay. And Padme's arrival on Mustafar in the theatrical version, without the knife, armed only with love, reads as a smaller act than it was supposed to be. She was supposed to step off that ship having already organized the Senate resistance, already prepared for something harder if the political arc failed. The knife in McCaig's drawing is what that preparation looked like. She carries it. She can't use it. And in failing to use it, she returns, in the intended version of the story, to the only remaining option, the political architecture she and Bail and Mon Mothma were already building. The theatrical cut gives you the woman who loved him. The fuller version gives you the woman who also knew he had to be stopped, who stood at the threshold of the one act that might have changed everything, held the knife to the back of his neck, and loved him too much to finish it. That is a tragedy of history. What the editing room left in its place was a tragedy of the heart. Both are real. Only one of them was supposed to define Padmé Amidala. Subscribe for more stories like this.